Hello world, hello Australia. Jamie here, the Crypto Koala. I've got a very special guest today. His name's Prash. He's the CEO and co-founder of Koala Brown. Great to have you here today, Prash.
Morning, Jamie. Thank you for having me.
I understand that you recently won an award. It's a big achievement in Australia, the Young Executive Award, the Australian Indian Executive Club. Am I correct there, Prash?
Yeah, it's the Indian Executive Council. We'll have a yearly award ceremony. I'm very thankful, and potentially it's for me, it's just a reflection of what the company has done for the last year. So yes, very pleased. Thank you.
Wonderful, great to hear, mate. I understand you went to Noosa recently as well in Queensland. How did that go? What did you get up to there?
So there was a conference in Noosa Heads called Crypto Coast Convention. It wasn't a huge conference. It was a sort of smaller, intimate gathering, which more and more so, I think most of us in the ecosystem are finding more beneficial, because there's a lot more opportunity for closed-door conversations, a lot more opportunity for interaction. There was quite a good representation from the regulators and some people from government bodies, particularly the Noosa government. There's quite a good representation from interstate as well. A couple of legal representatives from various parts of Australia came down to talk about STOs and the legal ramifications of STOs, which is a very interesting topic going forward. And it's good to see that being sort of brought up more in the ecosystem. And all in all, yeah, very, very interesting time. 2 days, short conference, but it was exactly sort of what we needed, I think, for a lot of us who attended.
Wonderful. It sounds like a very refreshing conference. So, Prash, what exactly do you guys do from Koala Brown? And what do you guys do there?
Right. Okay. It's a common question I get asked. So at Koala Brown, we're a cryptocurrency brokerage. So quite different from an exchange. There isn't any complicated platforms or order books that you need to work through. The idea for brokerage is to take all of that out of the equation, all the complication out of the equation, and instead every client gets a personal broker who guides them through the entire investing experience. Think of it like a wealth manager, someone who manages all of the usual financial needs, but in this case, it's for cryptocurrency, and the broker takes them through everything from education to wallet setup, security, and then gets them through their buy-sell process, and we're able to do large volume orders at a spot price with instant settlement, which I don't think many people in Australia are able to offer. And ongoing, we have an analyst team that provides ongoing market analysis, so to allow for diversification opportunities, and an in-house accountant that does crypto tax consulting, helps people put crypto into their self-managed super funds. And really, the idea is to create a cradle-to-grave solution so that you don't need to look anywhere else, and all your crypto needs are met in one location.
Oh, wonderful. I'd like to try and tap into the OT side of things as well, because not a lot of people know about that. They understand, exchanges, they understand the common sort of the face of trading. Yes. But not a lot of people know about the OT side of things. I know that's something that's ever increasingly getting popular. Is it something that you'd be able to just emphasize a bit more what you do there, Koala Brown, on the OT side of things?
Sure. We are principally an OTC brokerage. I think most people have a misconception that when you mention OTC, this is just for the big whales. This is for the $200-300 million buys. This is for the institutional investors. And to an extent, they're not wrong, because those markets work primarily via OTC. The main, I guess what OTC means, it's over the counter, which means it doesn't go across an exchange. It isn't reflected in any order books. It isn't reflected in any price movements. It's based on individual negotiations between brokers or between parties, and the trade goes through with no real, I guess, transparency in terms of the general marketplace. However, I think the important thing to clarify is that this is not just limited to these large volume orders. Being an OTC brokerage, the whole point is that we're able to offer to our customers that same sort of service at a much more accessible price point, or a more accessible order volume size. So even at someone coming in to buy at a 10K level, we still offer them the capacity to make that purchase at a single spot price without having to work through the order book, for example, on an exchange. So they don't face the slippage. That's something we cover entirely, and they're able to buy whatever they need to buy, whether it's $5 grand, 10 grand, or 500 grand worth of crypto at a single spot price. And that's what OTC trading is at the end of the day, regardless of how small or large the volume you're actually talking about.
Oh, okay. Just sort with the liquidity component of that, is that easy to do with Caliber and Brown when it comes to liquidation of assets?
We have no upper limit. And I know a concern for a lot of people who've invested, particularly those who've invested early and are holding large holdings of crypto, is how am I going to get out when the time comes that I do want to get out? Because that can be quite difficult trying to offload large amounts of liquidity. And that's one of our main value propositions, I suppose, in that we can process, throw a figure out at you. If you come to me and say, I've got $1 million worth of Bitcoin, I need to liquidate that now, I could make that happen for you within the next half an hour.
Oh, wow.
So instantly at a spot price and with probably next day settlement. In that we'll lock in the price right away. Just the delay then happens to be the banks and how long they take to get the money to you. And so that ability to liquidate large amounts instantly is not necessarily something that the ecosystem is utilizing very much at the moment. I don't think that many people are liquidating right now. But as the price starts to go up and the market starts to shift, certainly that liquidation opportunity will start to become a great value proposition that we're able to offer our clients.
Okay, so just moving on now, Prash, what do you think for Bitcoin and crypto are going to be the fundamentals to drive the price? So we're talking, what's important to me would be like adoption, use case. So what do you think, what factors do you reckon is going to drive up that price, Prash?
Sure. Everyone talks about adoption, and I can't disagree with you on that. If you talk about cryptocurrencies as being a currency foremost, for a currency to start to be, currency needs to be utilized to see greater mainstream adoption. And at the moment, it's the lack of infrastructure surrounding the ecosystem that places a huge barrier on this, because without sufficient infrastructure, there isn't sufficient opportunity for utilization. And that limit on the utilization is what is going to limit its capacity to really become a thing, so to speak, in the long term. So infrastructure is going to be a big one, and that includes infrastructure to support retailers, getting on board more retailers who will accept cryptocurrency, improved banking infrastructure, so there's less clampdowns on companies that use cryptocurrency. That's a big problem throughout this ecosystem. That's just a few examples, I guess, infrastructure-wise. So that's one thing. The second thing, which I think will make a huge difference, is regulation. Whether you like it or hate it. And I know the views within the community are very divided on regulation. That the purists think that regulation is a terrible idea because it is meant to be a self-regulating market. And it's easy to get caught up in that sort of evangelism and advocacy. But I think for the sake of getting us across the line in the next 2 to 20 years, perhaps, in terms of getting that mainstream adoption, in terms of getting this, not using the word snuck through, but getting this through the gates that are preventing this from becoming a legitimate mainstream financial instrument. Regulation is going to be the one thing that allows that to happen. And how that regulation then evolves to head back towards the true tenets of what the, I guess, ideological background towards cryptocurrencies are, that will remain to be seen further down the track. But for now, until there's some sort of regulation that happens, that comes on board in a big way, that allows crypto to become a regulated financial instrument, that's going to be a big barrier towards mainstream investors, institutional investors getting into the market. And that's where really the bulk of the money is. I mean, the total amount of assets under management, if you look at high net worth investors around the world being held by traditional financial advisors and wealth managers, is about $70 trillion. And the crypto market is languishing somewhere in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And so the potential movement of funds, which will be reflected in a price rise there, is immense if we can garner that target market. Maybe one more thing that I'll probably mention is custody. And at the moment, I think a big issue facing any institutional investor that wants to come in is a lack of a legitimate custodial solution. There are plenty of people offering custodial services, but a full-fledged custodial solution with an underwriting as a safety net doesn't truly exist. And that continues to be a barrier because of the security concerns that have always surrounded crypto, the capacity for hacks, the capacity for loss. Until we have that, again, we're going to struggle to see institutional investors really come on in a big way. And I think, for me, those are three of the main things that are going to drive the future of this industry, and definitely a future of this price point.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you completely, Prash. Just for an example, I was just doing some Christmas shopping the other day for my family over in the UK. And there's a manufacturer, or it's a store, it's an online store that sells cosmetic products, bath products.
Right.
And I done some shopping for my mum, my nan and my sister, bought them individual presents. And when I went to pay, it gave me the option to pay in Bitcoin, and it blew me away. And it was through BitPay, I believe. And it was just a phenomenal thing where I think something like that's going to really aid in adoption, especially this time of year where you've got like e-commerce, online shopping, and having a payment method as crypto. It's just a thing I thought I'll share with you, Prash.
Absolutely, that's very encouraging to hear. That's very encouraging to hear. I wish I could have heard more stories like that of retailers, particularly online retailers, accepting Bitcoin. I'd keep shopping there if I were you.
Oh, definitely. I think I'll be going back there next year. I guess stores like Marks and Spencer's. Over here we've got Myer and David Jones, Australian stores which are known. It'd just be good to, when you go and purchase goods online, they've got that option for Bitcoin. And
Queensland is distinctly leading the way with that, particularly in Australia. Brisbane is probably the highest highest number of retailers that accept Bitcoin. The Fortitude Valley is one of the most crypto-friendly places I've ever been in. It's a stretch of stores where everything from cafes to furniture stores that accept crypto. You've got, I think, 2 towns now in Queensland that are entirely powered by crypto, so to speak. And that's a great testament to the work that the crypto community in Queensland has been putting in.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It seems like Queensland's doing a lot of good work in adoption there. So, mate, moving on to with the financial institution side, what do you reckon? Like, say, for instance, like with Bitcoin and with crypto, investing in Bitcoin and crypto as a form of investment over traditional investments like gold, S&P 500, do you think that it's a better alternative method to sort of, what's your thoughts on that, Prash?
Sure. I guess I'll start this entire thing by saying, firstly, that this is not financial advice. That seems to be a disclaimer that probably should be made when we start to talk about investments or alternative investments. But with that in mind, my view remains that crypto at this stage is still one. I mean, I think we all know this is still a very volatile instrument. It's still a risky investment in the eyes of many people because of that volatility, because it's still so young, because they're still unsure which direction it's going to go. There are a lot of people who believe in the industry as a whole, but are still unsure of, I've heard the term, I really believe in, of course, I believe in cryptocurrency, but I don't know if it's going to be Bitcoin. I don't know if it's going to be EOS or Ethereum. And so there's still that uncertainty, which makes the investment not something people are able to pin down rock solid. Having said that, if you're going to consider this a diversification opportunity, if you consider this and the volatility, but with the volatility comes that potential for high reward as comes with high risk. If you consider that to be that small portion of your portfolio that you're using to play with, you're using in a more sort of exploratory style, then having that as 2% of your portfolio, for example, could be a very effective strategy. The flip side to that as well is that depending on where you see the financial market sitting at the moment, and I'm not going to make any crystal ball predictions on when the next financial crisis is upon us or the way financial markets are trending, leave that for everyone to sort of look at the way global financial markets are sitting at the moment. But if you do feel that a potential downturn in global financial markets is imminent, then it becomes a very effective strategy to put some of your portfolio into a non-correlated hedge, a non-correlated, or markets that are uncorrelated to traditional fiat markets as a hedge against fiat currency risk. And traditionally, that have been markets like fine art, that have been commodities like precious metals, like gold, like silver. And now, as opposed to at any time in the past, we now have another alternative in that category, which are cryptocurrencies, which are a non-correlated asset, which could act as a hedge against traditional financial market risk. And that, for me, is one of the big value propositions that cryptocurrency offers. And almost counterintuitively to most people seeing it as a risky investment, I think it could actually be considered a safe bet, a good hedge strategy if you consider it a portion of your portfolio as opposed to your entire portfolio.
Oh, for sure. It's just thinking that back in 2008 when we had the GFC and saw the birth of Bitcoin when the white paper came out, and it was like the very conception sort of stage, there was sort of only gold as really an alternative. So it seems like now there is that, if history was to repeat itself, there is an alternative now. So Bitcoin could be that alternative.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's how we hope that the greater financial industry starts to recognize that as well.
Oh, definitely, for sure. And it's interesting. There was a tweet going a couple of weeks ago by Ron Paul, and if you had $10,000, what would you invest it in? And
yes, I
it
did
was
do that.
Federal Reserve notes, 10-year US Reserve federal bonds, and US Treasury bonds, gold, and Bitcoin. 95,000 people voted, and Bitcoin got 50%, and that was pretty amazing. So Prash, so we've got some interesting things coming on in the institutional world. So coming up, as you most probably know, with BACT possibly being announced or coming into effect late January. Got VanEck as well. Also NASDAQ partnering with VanEck, and hopefully that gets approved late February. So some very interesting things early next year, Q1. So what are your thoughts on that with that sort of potential future?
My first thought, and without wanting to sound too pessimistic, is that I wouldn't trust the chronology on that at all. If history is anything to go by and the pattern of the SEC is anything to go by, I'll believe it when it happens. But as it stands, I'm always expecting just another delay, which is what the SEC has done repeatedly, time and time and again. So that's always in the back of my mind, as probably something dragging me down from eternal optimism. But the fact that it's not just one decision, there was a time where there was this one decision we were waiting on, which got delayed. Now there are about 3 or 4 decisions that we're waiting on. There are things happening in various different parts of the world, all geared towards greater institutional investment and greater institutional adoption. For me, that's a great sign. The institutions like Fidelity, one of the largest wealth managers in the world, they've got 7.4 trillion under management. The fact that they had a huge announcement earlier this year that they were opening up their own cryptocurrency division, as well as a whole wealth management portal for all of their clients to be able to access cryptocurrency, I think that is a huge validation of their belief in this space, and the fact that they're looking to move their investors into looking in that direction. And the combination of all of these multiple events, I think point towards the fact that yes, the financial services industry is starting to look at this more seriously. They are looking to try and get their ducks in a row for when a potential bull market may hit. And at this stage, considering the way the market sits, we really need some sort of, I'm not going to call it a seismic event necessarily, but we do need quite a distinct push something quite dramatic, I think, that we haven't seen in the past, to happen to really kickstart the next price rise. And something like an ETF getting approved could be that. Something like one of these major traditional financial players really solidifying their involvement, or they want to move into the space, is really what's going to do that. And I'm very excited and looking forward to that.
Oh, for sure. I think something that's worth mentioning, going back a few weeks ago, was the first ETF approved in Switzerland. Now,
That's
I know
right.
you've just been following that with Amoon offering exchange traded product. And since they've been trading, they've got some decent volume, something like 400,000 daily. So I think
Right,
that
I haven't
that's
looked into
going to
that. Great.
maybe look back with their ICE and VanEx, and they'll be most probably watching it very closely, and they'll be like, knock on a SEC doors and come on guys, let's get this approved. And it should hopefully put a bit more pressure and show that there's leaders in that space in Europe that it can be done. But for the last, I'm not going to hold my breath. I guess, like you said, Prash, it's you've got to look at both sides, because we delay after delay after delay, and it's sort of it's just waiting to actually happen. But that catalyst would be pretty good. You know, one in the US, an ETF approved in the US would be really good. And also, like with Bitcoin futures, having that sort of where you get that underlying asset where it's physically delivered as well, in Bitcoin would be, I think, would be a really good thing for that. Might be a good catalyst as well. But yeah, so Prash, I'm just thinking with going back with a SEC and how that clamping down on ICOs, it seems that they've had a good, they've been swinging the hammer recently pretty hard, especially with ICOs that have in the past said that they're utilities, but they've deemed them as securities, and they've said, well, come on guys, you really need to be compliant here. What's your take on that?
The regulatory flip-flop on ICOs continues, and probably will continue for some time. I'm not going to go into too much about what how the regulators are viewing it, mainly because no one seems to be able to make up their mind. But I think the one thing that people have woken up to is that obviously the ICO craze, which fueled a lot of the price rise late last year, was fueled by pure speculation, over optimism, and people who, I guess, didn't truly understand the tenets of investing or what they were investing in. Perhaps didn't understand the fact that what they were putting their money into wasn't really backed by any sort of equity. And that's really how the security token conversation has come in a big way. A talk I listened to recently, actually at the Crypto Coast conference, and I've heard him speak a number of times, is Alex Svetsky. He's the CEO of Amber Labs in Brisbane. And he has a very pointed attitude against ICOs. In fact, he does a talk called Why We Didn't ICO, which is always an interesting argument, and one which it's been interesting to see the climate. I heard him do that talk late last year, and which raised a lot of ire in the audience, raised a lot of anger in the audience. And I've seen him do that talk multiple times, and listening to him do that talk a couple of days ago, the climate shifted completely from angry people in the audience, people sort of sitting there going, yes, of course, I thought that too, which is always an interesting transition to see. Anyway, a good friend of mine, probably someone who'd be worthwhile having on the show just to talk about exactly that. But so even the public, I think, has woken up to the idea that a lot of the times you don't need a native token. And a lot of ICOs were very much about producing their own native token. The fact that you're not actually getting equity in a particular company, and that whether the token goes up or down, it doesn't. Whether the company does well or not isn't necessarily reflected in the token price. All these various issues that are quite different to the way traditional investments have always worked. And I think that's what spelt a rise of a lot of pessimism around the ICO market, and probably deservedly so. Not every ICO doesn't need to exist, but I think there are a lot of ICOs that didn't need to be ICOs that could have been straight out capital raises within a company in the traditional model of equity investing. So, and that's where I guess it's a segue into the STO conversation, which has been in a lot of ways dominating the newscape, in recent weeks and months, and probably legitimately so.
It seems like there's a shift, like you're saying, that going from the ICOs and starting to go into like STOs, more STOs, whereas the attitude going back 6 months ago was like, oh no, we won't go there. It's sort of like all the libertarians have slightly changed their tune, me being one of them as well. It's like, yeah, this with freedom, we don't need Wall Street, we don't need regulation, we can do without and we'll be all right. But now it seems like maybe this year, going in 2019, it's changing, and people sort of will be more welcoming to the idea that, well, maybe we need regulations to safeguard ourselves. Maybe we need to look at our fundraising structure to make sure that we are ticking all the boxes, and so we don't repeat the mistakes of some of these other ICOs. And I think maybe the market's starting to mature a little bit, where people are starting to recognise that investors, these new investors that have been around for some time here, are starting to recognise, this ICO is not delivering. This is not, they've got all these people that have got wallets just for the sake of trading, not for the sake of actually using that token for utility purpose. So I think that what I'm getting just by talking to the community is that there's a shift towards STOs. Going back last year, so like 98% of the ICOs were utility tokens. There's only like a 2% that was actually STOs. And it seems like that's slowly increasing now. A lot more STOs, and STOs, a lot more hard work. A lot more funds are needed to be compliant. So I guess it's going to weed out the projects that are not really in it for the technology. They're in it just to raise a quid. And interest in going into this STO world, this STO future in 2019 with institutions. What do you think, Prash? Do you think that we could be going in that direction with STOs?
See, I was going to say something which you brought up earlier. Look,
yeah, sure.
I'm a libertarian myself, Jamie. It's the reason why I got into the space. It's what drew me into the space in the first place. My libertarian ideals still run very strong. And as one, it's easy to get caught up in this utopian idea that I guess we all entered into this space with, right? We all wandered into this bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and imagined this great libertarian future where we could stick it to the man and we didn't have to play by the rules that were handed down to us, that we didn't have a choice to, and all of this. And that's all well and good. But I think a lot of us have realized, and I've put myself in that category as well, which I realized quite early on, that it doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process. And when you try and do it overnight, you end up with a bit of a disaster, because all of a sudden you delve straight into a potentially anarchist scenario. And for me, regulation is, I often think of it as the Trojan horse. It's the Trojan horse that will allow this ecosystem to sort of sneak in and start to grow roots within the traditional financial system. And then how that develops, we'll have to see later on. And when you bring it to the whole ICO discussion, STOs will be the Trojan horse that allows this ecosystem to sneak into the way the traditional investor market has always seen it. I think STOs are a great thing for the industry in a lot of ways. They provide a framework that the traditional financial markets recognize a lot more. They allow us to weed out bad players or dubious players. They allow us to, or it prevents companies that are trying to raise capital with just an idea and nothing else from being able to successfully do so. They put further barriers and layers of proof that become necessary to prove the worth of your project before an investor will put money into it. And that's safeguards that the traditional financial system has always utilized and has worked well for them. And it's safeguards that have been lost with a crowdsourcing model where every man and his dog could throw some money into a project, which, yes, is part of the libertarian ideal, but the regulation exists to protect the investor who may not necessarily be the most savvy, who may not necessarily know what to look out for when they're investing in a project. That, at the end of the day, is what regulation is there for. Regulation has been perverted, I understand, over time to be a force of authority. But if you really look at the tenets of regulation, they're there to protect the individual investor. And if we can hold on to that element of good that it has and marry that to the ecosystem that we're working in, then I think that's where STOs will really see their greatest benefit.
Awesome. Yeah, well said, Prash. Just bringing it back to Caleb and Brown now, how do you guys, just thinking of being compliant for your clients, what do you guys do to make sure that you're compliant and any new clients that wish to get involved with Caleb and Brown, what steps do you take to make sure that you're, ticking all the boxes? And
absolutely. So as of April this year, AUSTRAC announced guidelines requiring every digital currency exchange service provider to be licensed by them. And so we're licensed by AUSTRAC to provide those digital currency exchange services. Every client has to go through a full formal KYC process, which requires the identity to be checked and then for them to be run through databases to ensure that we are being compliant with the regulations laid down by AUSTRAC. For us, that's absolutely crucial. And as we move forward into the STO space, which really we're nowhere close to yet because regulation still hasn't caught up. But I'm very curious to see how that will develop. And we certainly work with a law firm very closely with John Basilos and Co. at Hall and Wilcox, who are very much at the forefront of STO regulation in this country. And so we're constantly going back and forth. So we're very much on the pulse of the way that's going to develop and the way we're then going to be able to offer that to our clients. There are security token exchanges that are being developed, both here and internationally. The Malta Digital Currency Exchange, which is very much being spearheaded by Rick Klink, who's a very prominent figure in Australia. Rick is absolutely everywhere. He was in Noosa last week as well and had some interesting chats with him there about how we can offer how we can translate some of their offerings on the Malta exchange to our clients here through Caleb and Brown. And that's something that that's part of our expansion process, is looking at how we can enable that access for our clients in the years moving forward.
So it seems like you've got a future plan of maybe expanding outside of Australia, New Zealand, and going over to say, like, you've got the friendly compliant countries that are quite welcoming, like Singapore, Malta, them sort of countries. Yeah. You're looking at maybe tapping into like the US or Canada, look way down the track when you sort of evolve into assisting projects with that STOs or brokerage for them sort of.
I don't think it's that much in the future. As it stands, about 50% of our clientele is international. Okay. Already, which really shouldn't surprise us when you consider this is a global currency. This is a global ecosystem. This is the whole point. Half the point of this whole ecosystem was that there was no barriers, no boundaries, no artificial restrictions of geography and currency. And so that's very much about our focus is definitely to stay within that agenda. So we accept any major fiat currency, and we turn that into any cryptocurrency for our clients. So you could send us South African Rand to be turned into Veritasium, and we could do that for you. And because everything can happen electronically, there's really no limitations on jurisdiction in terms of geography that we need to follow. And so particularly with the security token offerings, our plan would certainly be to look into which jurisdictions we want to expand more into, depending on the demand. It comes down to the clients that we have, the clients that we're being approached by, and what the demand is from our clients. It's what we seek to service. And that's a constant back and forth conversation that we have with our client base. I guess that's the difference between an exchange and a brokerage, is that because it's such a personalized model, we know at any time exactly what our clients want or are looking for, because that conversation is happening daily between the broker and the clients. And so For us, market research, fortunately, is not something we have to go out there and actively do. It's an inbuilt part of our business model, which sometimes we take it for granted that we don't have to do this market research. It just sort of comes to us. We're very lucky in that way in terms of the data that's available to us very much organically.
Just yourself, Prash, talking with me now and doing interviews of other YouTubers, engaging with the community, and you're sort of showing that there is that one-on-one, that open communication. You're sharing your updates, and that's different from exchanges. And I'm guessing that sort of is confidence. You sort of have that relationship where you're having that to and fro, that feedback. So it'd be very interesting, and I'll look forward to following Caleb & Brown and seeing how you develop and how you guys grow in the future. Especially, I know you're quite known in Australia, and I look forward to seeing how you go in the future, Prash.
Thank you, Jamie. I think that that personal relationship is very important to us. If I might digress very briefly and slightly, one of the primary problems with the traditional financial system that drove the creation of cryptocurrencies, this is back in 2008, was the complete lack of transparency, right? There was a lot of frustration about the opacity of the traditional financial model. And that's something that the cryptocurrency ecosystem seeks to break, with the blockchain, where everything is completely visible and transparent. And then you have the situation of exchanges where it becomes hard to understand. There's a huge knowledge gap, this huge barrier for people who don't understand it well enough to enter into. And so for us, maintaining that transparency as far as possible by having this complete open conversation with our clients, where they have access to someone at any time. There's no support tickets that you have to wait 2 weeks to receive back from an exchange. That for us is absolutely vital. We want our clients to be able to call us at any time of day, at any time of night, even to be able to have that conversation about their holdings, about their assets. And I think that's one, for me personally, I think that's what's going to be the biggest thing that will determine our success going forward, and that will establish the greatest level of comfort for our clients. So yeah, see where that goes.
Definitely. I like having that support. If you was a novice coming into this market, completely didn't know what cryptocurrency was, it's quite daunting setting up an exchange, putting trades in, going through that process, not knowing what to invest in, or not so much not being advised on what to invest in, but how to get assistance and talk through that process. So absolutely. Having someone available,
person.
Yeah, it's so thank you so much for your time, Prash. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, talking with yourself, and I look forward to maybe talk with you in the future.
Be very happy to, Jamie. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thank you, Prash. I'll see you later. Hey, have a good day.
Cheers. See ya.
Bye.